At an upscale jewelry store in the quiet town of Brookmere, a black teenager stepped inside, his heart light with excitement. He was searching for the perfect birthday gift for his little sister. But that joy didn't last long. From the moment he entered, the store clerk's eyes followed him, not with welcome, but with suspicion. When he accidentally dropped a bracelet, that silent scrutiny snapped into outright accusation. Within minutes, the police arrived. They didn't ask questions. They didn't check the facts. They simply believed her and handcuffed him on the spot. What they didn't know was that this boy wasn't alone. He had someone powerful in his corner, his mother, and she was about to walk into that store and turn everything upside down in a way none of them could have expected. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in Brookmere, a peaceful suburban town where life moved at an unhurried pace. Families strolled through the park, children laughed as they raced toward the swings, and neighbors exchanged polite greetings on their way to the local farmer's market. The sun cast a golden hue over everything, making the town seem almost picturesque. But for Tyler Morgan, this day was about more than just enjoying the weekend. He had one goal in mind: to buy the perfect birthday gift for his little sister, Nia. Tyler had been saving up for months, working extra hours at the local coffee shop, carefully setting aside every tip and paycheck just so he could afford something special. He had finally found it: a silver charm bracelet from Ashford and Lane, the most prestigious jewelry store in town. He had passed by that store countless times, pressing his nose against the glass display, imagining the way Nia's eyes would light up when she saw it. Today was the day. He clutched his wallet in his pocket, reassured by the weight of the money inside. This wasn't just a purchase. It was a symbol of love, of everything he wanted to give her despite the struggles their family had faced. As he approached the store, the pristine glass windows gleamed under the sunlight, reflecting the bustling streets behind him. He paused for a moment, adjusting his hoodie. Though it was unzipped, revealing a neatly pressed polo shirt underneath, he was well aware of how people sometimes reacted to a young black boy in a hoodie. Still, he shook off the thought. Not today. Just walk in, buy the bracelet, and leave. Taking a deep breath, he pulled open the heavy glass door, and a soft chime rang through the store. Inside, Ashford and Lane was everything he imagined: sleek glass display cases, velvet-lined shelves, and rows of gleaming gold and silver under bright, almost blinding lights. The faint scent of expensive cologne and polished wood lingered in the air. The customers inside were mostly well-dressed older women, their diamond rings catching the light as they admired necklaces and earrings that cost more than Tyler had earned in his entire life. He ignored their curious glances, keeping his focus locked on the bracelet he had come for. Behind the counter stood Deborah Langley, a middle-aged white woman with carefully styled blonde hair and sharp, calculating eyes. Her expression was neutral at first, but the moment her gaze landed on Tyler, something shifted. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her grip on the counter tightened ever so slightly, and her eyes, once bored, now carried an unmistakable scrutiny. Tyler felt it immediately, that shift, that silent but deafening question that always hung in the air when people like her looked at people like him. "What are you doing here?" He had seen that look before. He had felt the weight of suspicion that clung to him like an invisible chain whenever he walked into places where people thought he didn't belong. But he refused to let it deter him. He approached the counter with a polite smile and pointed at the bracelet displayed in the case. "I'd like to see that one, please," he said, his voice steady and calm, the way his mother had always taught him to speak when dealing with people like this. Deborah didn't move. She folded her arms and tilted her head, her voice soaked in condescension as she asked, "Are you sure? That one's quite expensive." Tyler's stomach tightened, but he held his expression steady, pulling out his wallet and unfolding the neat stack of cash he had worked months to save. "I'm sure," he said calmly. Deborah's eyes flicked to the cash, her lips curling ever so slightly in what looked like offense. Rather than easing, her tension grew. Her fingers hovered near the phone, but she didn't reach for the bracelet. Instead, she scoffed softly and asked, "And where exactly did you get all that money?" Though her tone feigned casualness, the blade of accusation lay just beneath. Tyler straightened slightly. Excuse me? He asked, though he already knew where this was going. She raised an eyebrow. It's just a lot of cash for someone your age. Did you borrow it from someone? Find it lying around? His jaw clenched. Taking a controlled breath, he replied, I work at Parker's Coffee House. I saved up for this. Deborah tapped her nails against the glass, humming dismissively. And you expect me to believe that? Yes, he said flatly. She laughed under her breath. Well, I suppose I should be flattered you thought you could fool me, she said, finally moving toward the case. But I've been working here a long time, kid. I know when something doesn't add up. Tyler's fists clenched at his sides. He forced them to relax. This was supposed to be simple. He hadn't come here to be insulted. Can I just see the bracelet, please? He asked, his voice still polite, but thinner now, stretched. Deborah sighed and pulled out the velvet tray. Be careful with it, she said sharply. It's worth more than what you probably make in a year. Grinding his teeth, Tyler said nothing and gently lifted the bracelet. The silver was cool against his fingers, and it was perfect. Exactly what he had imagined. But as he tilted it slightly to admire the charms, the bracelet slipped from his hand, landed with a light clink on the glass, and bounced to the floor. His breath hitched. Before he could move, Deborah shrieked, Oh my God! I knew it! The sound sliced through the room. Heads turned. Eyes fixed. Wait! Tyler started, but Deborah jabbed her finger toward him, her face burning with accusation. You were trying to pocket it, weren't you? Thought you'd get away with it. What? No, Get the police here. Now! Now! She shouted into the phone, already dialing. We've got a thief. Young black male. Hoodie. Tried to steal from us. Tyler stood frozen. Her words slammed into him like a wall. The air thickened, heavy with suspicion. Every face in the store twisted toward him. A woman clutched her purse tighter. No one asked questions. No one checked. No one doubted her. His mind screamed for him to speak, to protest, but he knew. They had already decided. In the distance, the wail of sirens pierced the air, growing louder as they rushed toward the store. The sound coiled through the silence like a threat, thick and inevitable. Tyler's chest tightened as the weight of the moment settled in. He had always known this could happen. Seen it in headlines, heard it in late-night whispers, felt it in his mother's cautious tone every time she said, Be careful. But knowing and living it were two different things. His breath was shallow, his body frozen. Every instinct told him to move, to escape, to speak. But he stayed still. One wrong move could be the difference between walking out or being dragged out. Deborah's voice rang out sharp and controlled as she gripped the counter with one hand and the phone with the other. Yes, right now. I need officers at Ashford and Lane immediately, she said. Eyes locked on Tyler, lips curling into a satisfied smirk. She lowered her voice just enough to sound calculated. He's getting aggressive. The accusation hit harder than a shout. Tyler hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved, but the room responded anyway. Customers shifted away. A woman clutched her purse. An old man frowned as if this were all too familiar to him. And in the middle of it all, the bracelet on the floor no longer looked like a gift. It looked like evidence. I didn't steal anything, Tyler said, locking eyes with Deborah. You know that. She scoffed, shaking her head. Oh, please, don't act innocent now. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? But I know you're kind. Her eyes swept over his hoodie, his sneakers, her voice low and full of venom. You walk in here looking like you belong, and then wait for the moment I turn my back. I see it all the time. Tyler didn't need her to say more. He already knew what she meant. She shrugged, as if her hatred were logic. You're offended? I'm just stating facts. Stores like this deal with thieves every day. I don't need to guess who's usually behind it. The door flew open. 2 officers stepped inside. Everything stopped. Deborah pointed like she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. There he is. That's him. He tried to steal from me. Before Tyler could speak, Sergeant Kellen was already moving forward, handcuffs in hand. Sir, Put your hands where I can see them. Tyler didn't move. I said now. I didn't do anything. His voice cracked but held. Deborah barked louder. You tried to pocket that. The nerve of you people. Officer Reeves hesitated, eyes bouncing between the bracelet and Tyler. But Kellen kept advancing. Step outside. Tyler could see it, the future playing out like a script. Deborah folded her arms, convinced she had one. But Tyler wasn't finished. He took a breath. Call my mother. Kellen scoffed. You can call her from the station. Tyler's voice came firmer this time, louder. No, call my mother. Now. Deborah rolled her eyes with theatrical disdain. Oh, let him call Mommy, she sneered. What is she, a public defender? Some activist? Gonna tell him to scream about injustice? She laughed short, sharp, hollow. But Tyler didn't respond. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket, careful with every movement, and pulled out his phone. He dialed with calm fingers. Mom, I need you at Ashford and Lane. Now. Sergeant Kellen furrowed his brow slightly, not alarmed, just puzzled. But Officer Reeves took a step back, the weight in Tyler's voice shifting something in the room. He wasn't begging. He wasn't panicking. He was waiting. The tension stretched. Seconds passed like minutes. Deborah tapped her foot. Kellen sighed and loosened his grip on the cuffs just a little. Reeves checked his watch. Customers began to murmur quietly, some pulling out their phones, others stepping farther back. And then the door opened again. She walked in, tall, commanding. Her heels echoed against the tile with crisp precision. She wore a navy blue suit that fit with quiet authority. Her eyes, sharp, calculating, familiar, swept across the room and landed on Tyler. Without hesitation, she flashed a badge that made the entire store freeze. I'm Dr. Celeste Morgan, she announced, Chief of Police, Brookmere PD. She turned her gaze toward the officers. And this, she said clearly, is my son. The silence that followed was total. Tyler didn't move. Kellen stiffened, his hand drifting from the cuffs. Officer Reeves exhaled slowly. But Deborah's face fell apart. Her confidence cracked like glass under pressure. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Wait, what? She stammered, her voice suddenly small, laced with panic. Celeste didn't even glance at her. Her focus was locked on Sergeant Kellen. Sergeant, she said calmly, but with deadly precision. I assume you have a reasonable explanation for why my son is standing here, surrounded, while you reach for your handcuffs before asking a single question. Kellen shifted uncomfortably. We received a report of an attempted theft, he said, his voice clipped, defensive. We responded accordingly. Celeste's eyes narrowed. Accordingly, she repeated. Meaning what? Walk in, see a black boy, and assume guilt? Kellen bristled. That's not what happened. Really? Celeste's tone didn't change, but the weight behind it sharpened. Deborah finally found her voice, snapping through the tension. I called because he tried to steal, she shouted. He dropped the bracelet. He was about to take it. I stopped him. Celeste turned, finally looking at her. The weariness in her eyes deepened as she glanced at Tyler, who hadn't said a word. He didn't need to. The frustration in his silence said everything. Even the son of the police chief still looked like a suspect. Celeste turned back to Sergeant Kellen. Did you check the security footage? She asked, voice low but razor sharp. Kellen hesitated. We were just about to. No, you weren't. Celeste cut in, calm and lethal. You were about to arrest him without reviewing any evidence, without questioning him, without doing your job. Officer Reeves swallowed hard, the weight of her words hanging in the room. He looked between his superior and Celeste. His earlier doubt now solidified into something firmer. Ma'am, he said quietly, we should check the footage. Kellen snapped his head toward him, clearly caught off guard, but the situation had shifted. He could no longer argue. Not now, not with who stood in front of him. Fine, he muttered. Deborah's face twisted. What? No, she snapped. I told you what happened. You're seriously going to listen to her? Her arm flailed toward Celeste, then to Tyler, her voice rising with that same venom she'd used earlier. You saw how he acted. This is ridiculous. For the first time, Celeste turned her full attention to Deborah. And in that moment, the room fell silent again. Deborah shrank under her stare, as if realizing the power she thought she held was gone. Mrs. Langley, Celeste said slowly, each word deliberate. Let me make something very, very clear. She stepped forward, not with volume, but with weight. You're standing in front of a boy who came into your store to buy a bracelet for his sister. A boy who saved his own hard-earned money to support your business. And you labeled him a thief before he even spoke. The store manager, who had been silent through the entire ordeal, finally moved. He slipped to the back to retrieve the footage. Moments later, it played on a small screen behind the counter. Silent, undeniable. Tyler entering the store. Tyler speaking politely. Tyler showing his money. Tyler dropping the bracelet. Nothing more. No theft. No attempt. No crime. Just a boy trying to buy a gift. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Reeves ran a hand down his face, eyes closed. Kellen stood stiff, jaw tight. Deborah looked pale, stunned, as though the ground had shifted beneath her and she didn't know where to place her feet. Celeste exhaled slowly, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, but no less commanding. So, Sergeant, she said, what happens now? Do you still want to arrest my son? Kellen said nothing. He didn't need to. Celeste turned back to Deborah. And you? She asked, her tone unreadable. Do you still want to explain what, exactly, you were so certain of? Deborah's lips trembled. She looked between Celeste, Tyler, the officers, the customers still watching from a distance. Some stunned, some quietly satisfied. She faltered. There was nothing left for her to say. Celeste gave a small, knowing nod. That's what I thought. Sergeant Kellen cleared his throat, his voice taut with strained professionalism. Ma'am, I think we're done here. Celeste arched an eyebrow. No apology? She asked, not expecting an answer. Kellen clenched his jaw but didn't speak. Deborah opened her mouth as if to salvage the moment, but nothing came out. There was nothing left. Celeste turned to Tyler. Come on, baby, she said softly. We're leaving. Tyler didn't move at first. He just stood there, staring at Deborah, at Kellen, at the wreckage left behind. He wanted to feel relieved, victorious, justified, but all he felt was tired, because even when you win, it never really feels like a win. Not when it starts with being treated like a suspect. He finally turned to leave. As he passed Deborah, he looked her in the eye one last time. All I wanted was to buy a bracelet, he said, his voice low but firm, the weight of everything behind it. But I guess I got something more valuable instead. With that, he walked out, head high, back straight. Deborah stood frozen, watching the life she once controlled crumble in silence. The heavy glass door closed behind Tyler and Celeste, but the tension inside the store remained thick, clinging to the air like smoke after a fire. It should have felt like victory, but Tyler's chest still felt tight, his stomach still knotted. They walked in silence toward the car. Celeste's strides were sharp, deliberate, heels striking the pavement with quiet authority. Tyler walked beside her, hands curled into fists, fingers aching from how tightly he'd held them. Not a word was spoken until they reached the car. Only then did Celeste turn to him, her expression unreadable. Are you okay? She asked. Her voice was measured, but beneath it was something deeper. Anger, fatigue, the kind of pain only a mother who's fought the same battle again and again could carry. Tyler glanced back toward the store. Through the glass, Deborah still stood behind the counter, pale and hollow, while the customers suddenly found themselves very interested in not looking. I don't know, he said honestly, dragging a hand down his face. I should feel better. I should feel like I proved something, like I won. Celeste studied him, then let out a breath, her features softening slightly. Baby, you shouldn't have had to prove anything in the first place. The words hit him harder than expected. His jaw tightened. "Yeah," he muttered. "I know." They stood like that for a moment, the air between them heavy. Then the door to Ashford and Lane swung open again. Tyler's body tensed. Deborah stepped out. She looked different now, smaller. Her hand gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. She hesitated, opened her mouth, then closed it. Her throat bobbed. Her eyes flicked from Celeste to Tyler. She took a step forward, then stopped. Finally, she just shook her head, said nothing, and walked away. Tyler let out a sharp, humorless laugh as Deborah disappeared down the sidewalk. "Figures," he muttered. Celeste folded her arms, scoffing. Cowards never know how to say they're sorry. They watched her vanish into the distance, her posture stiff and retreating, like she was trying to outrun what she had done. Officer Reeves and Sergeant Kellen exited the store shortly after. Reeves gave them a brief glance, guilt written in the way he avoided eye contact. Kellen didn't look at them at all. He simply nodded stiffly in Celeste's direction, a silent acknowledgement of defeat, before turning toward his squad car. Tyler exhaled slowly. "So that's it?" he asked. Celeste didn't look at him. "For now," she replied. He turned back toward the store one last time. Inside, the customers had returned to their shopping, as if nothing had happened. As if a black teen hadn't just been accused, humiliated, and nearly arrested in front of them. He clenched his jaw and looked away. "I just wanted to buy a bracelet," he muttered. Celeste placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know, baby," she said. He took a deep breath and let it out, his shoulders relaxing just slightly. Then they got into the car. Inside, the silence felt heavier. Tyler leaned back into the seat, exhaustion threading through every bone. Celeste gripped the steering wheel, her nails pressing faint crescents into the leather. Outside, the world went on. Cars pulled into parking spots, strangers walked past. The sky remained the same shade of indifferent blue, but Tyler still felt it. The heat of Deborah's accusation on his skin. The judgment in the eyes of people who had done nothing. Finally, Celeste broke the silence. "Are you sure you're okay?" Her voice was softer now, not the voice of a police chief, but of a mother. "I don't know," Tyler admitted. "I feel angry and tired, like none of this matters. Tomorrow it'll be someone else in my place, and no one's going to stop to ask if they're okay." Celeste inhaled, then forced herself to relax. "I know," she said. "It's a cycle that keeps repeating. But today we fought back. You didn't let them break you." Tyler gave a bitter laugh. "Didn't I? I stood there while that woman talked about me like I was nothing. And when she got caught, she still couldn't say the words." He turned to her, frustration burning in his eyes. "How do you fight something that deep? How do you make people see you as a person when they've already decided you're not?" Celeste didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quiet but unshakable. "By refusing to let them define you, by knowing who you are, and by showing them over and over that they're wrong, even when they won't admit it."